Hello, hello. Is anybody here already? Hmm. Oh, hello. Somebody's already here. Just check I'm actually live. I mean, I assume I am. Yep, we are live. Hello. Hello, Thigh Catalyst from New Zealand. And hello, Cass in session. And hello, Mr. Scrub. You saw me on the chase. You saw my very mediocre performance on the chase. I will never forget that the person who invented the telephone was Alexander Graham Bell, is my lesson. That will forever haunt me from my lesson on the chase, my time on the chase. It was such a shame half the team was gone. I know. And that tour guide lady on my team was really good, and she did so good at the cash builder, and then she didn't make it back for the final chase. So I was a bit gutted. I reckon if she made it back, we would have had a good chance. But yeah. Ryven says, "Love your work, mate." Thank you, Ryven. Appreciate it. Um, Easy Mass 971. Hi, Logiel Antiopeia. Man, you guys have some creative names. But thank you all for tuning in. Greg Candy, what's up, bro? I love your videos. Appreciate that, man. I really appreciate that. Oh, Alexander Graham Bell technically wasn't the person who invented it. Interesting. Uh, Oder Steven says, "Love your videos. Thanks, mate. I make you skeptical at all researchers." I think that's not a bad thing. I think given the state of how bad things are, it's better to be a little bit skeptical, right? I mean, that's not to say that all science is bad. I think most science is good, but the problem is definitely a lot bigger than people realize, and I'm just sort of doing my small part to make people more aware of that. Surprised you haven't hit 100K by now. What's the subscriber count now? I will tell you. We're very close. We are at 99935. So 65 subscribers. 65 subscribers more. So if you guys have spare Google accounts that you want to log into real quick, or you have a partner or a family member living with you, or a housemate who you can now nudge and be like, "Listen, my favorite YouTuber Pete Judo is trying to get to 100K. Would you mind helping him out?" I would appreciate that. Greg says, "If I want a new rabbit hole, I should get into nutritional research. The book Fiat Food is a great starting point." I've never heard of Fiat Food. But yeah, I'm sure there's lots of nutritional. I was thinking of actually covering a Nobel Prize winner who got really obsessed with vitamin C. I'm trying to remember his name actually. It was my dad who told me about him, of all people. Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling was this Nobel Prize winning guy in medicine, physiology, and towards the end of his life, he just got like super obsessed with vitamin C, and he was like, "Yeah, people should be taking like an absurd amount of vitamin C." And it was like, yeah, it's kind of a weird note to end his life on, but like he kind of died on that rock. Um, Catalyst says there's too much research and we should be more objective. There is an argument that there's too much research. I mean, like, obviously, more science is good if it's good quality, but I think because the incentive system is based on quantity rather than quality, um, there's definitely a lot of junk research, which then makes the good stuff harder to find. Asymptotic behavior. Always wanted to go to an Ivy League. After watching this channel, I'm glad I went to a state university. I mean, I don't. Here's the thing, right? Like, if you get into Harvard or Stanford or one of these top universities, like that's not a bad thing. That's obviously a huge achievement. Um, but I think it's important to be aware that, like, maybe these institutions have incentive systems for their professors and for progression within that institution that maybe isn't in the best interest of actual science. Um, so yeah, I mean, I touched on this in a previous video. uh, I can't remember whether it was the Claudine Gay video or the Francesca Gina video, but one of the Harvard ones, where I said that, like, what I heard is that the culture at Harvard has now shifted a lot. So like, before it was all about getting, if you were a professor at Harvard, it was all about getting your name on as many papers as possible, publishing as much as possible. Because that, the idea behind that being that it would increase your portfolio, it would increase your like public status. But the culture apparently has changed since, because of Francesca Gino and the whole situation that's happened. That now the culture has been like, let's be a bit more conservative. Make sure that you check everything out really carefully. Don't put your name to something that you don't know is right, because they don't want any more of these scandals. It's just not good for the name of Harvard. So, yeah, it's interesting to know that the culture has changed, hopefully for the better. So yeah, congrats on getting into state university, but no shame on anyone who goes to a top university either. Lots of questions. Okay. Uh, at your work without replication studies, how can you be confident in any effect you find? You can't, and even with replications, you can't. Um, Replications make you more confident, for sure, a lot more confident, but they're not perfect. There's lots of cases where studies have been replicated, but then somebody else tries to replicate it and then it doesn't work, and then so there's even conflicting replications. For example, in behavioral science, there's something called the depletion effect, right, or ego depletion, which is the idea that your self-control depletes throughout the day, and that your self-control is tied to your glucose in your blood. And so if you uh, replenish your glucose in your blood by drinking a Gatorade, for example, then you have more self-control. That was the original finding, and one group replicated it, and another group couldn't replicate it, and so it was like this back and forth for many different years, until I think like 2 years ago, there was like a giant multi-lab, super concurrent, like insane study that like where they replicated it across multiple places in the world, with research that was all done at the same time, and they found that they couldn't replicate it. So, you know, stuff like that happens all the time. Replication is great and should be encouraged, but it's not a guarantee. And I think if you're going to apply anything from science, particularly behavioral science, in your like real world, like in business or in government, then it's always best to do a pilot first and check that it actually works in the specific context that you're thinking of rolling it out to. Um, any plans/ideas for content direction as your channel grows? Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep covering the same kind of things that I have been, and also, um, yeah, I might branch out into different fields. So far, it's been mainly behavioral science and medicine, and so maybe I'll look into some other fields as well. So that's one direction for growth. I mean, there's certainly fraud in many different fields, and interesting things to talk about in many different fields other than those two. So yeah, but like behavioral science is obviously where I went to first because that's what I'm trained in, and then medicine, the the methodology that people in medicine use is quite similar to behavioral science, so I can understand that research pretty easily. Um, as long as I understand like the medical context for it. But in terms of the methods, like yeah, I get that quite easily because of my training. So that's kind of why I went there first. But maybe I'll look into like physics or engineering or nutrition, as somebody suggested earlier. So yeah. Lim Ziheng says, "What's my favorite academic scandal? None of them. I hate them all. Like, you know, like I don't take joy in explaining the fact that the scientists that we look up to are, faking their data. Like I'm just reporting on news, but I don't. what I mean? It's like a weird thing to say it's my favorite because like it's not. It's obviously bad for the world that it's happening. So yeah, no scandal is my favorite. What's the one I'm most invested in? Obviously, the Francesca Gino one because it's in my field. It's behavioral science. You know, Francesca Gino was a researcher who I had cited many times in the past, and whose research I was very familiar with. So, yeah, obviously, I'm most invested emotionally in the Francesca Gino one, but to call it my favorite, I think would be a mistake. Greg says, I took a behavioral analysis of law class and was skeptical of a lot of papers right after the semester was done. I discovered your channel. Yeah, yeah. And a lot of people have been in a similar boat where they learn something at uni. I remember learning some things at uni and then finding out later that they were false or wrong or not based on anything reliable. So you know, I think that's a normal part of science, to be honest. You know, that you should never take anything that you read or get told by a professor to be like absolute truth, um, because it's not, you know, a lot of the time. uh, just how damaged do I think the foundation of our educational system is? We seem to have poor quality teachers in K-12 and the university seem even more academically corrupt. I can't talk to America because I didn't grow up there. I grew up in the UK. I live in the UK. But you know, certainly from an incentives point of view, I think reform is in place and like, you know, needs to be put in place. And um, you know, if we're incentivizing researchers to publish more rather than publish high quality stuff, and if we're only rewarding sort of, you know, crazy, you know, surprising positive results and punishing researchers for coming up with negative results, I think is that's super harmful as an incentive system. And so yeah, reform is definitely in place. Needs to be put in place. Oh my goodness. Greg Candy has donated $5, and that is very generous of you, mate. Greg, you don't have to do that. I'm not asking for any money in this stream, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So yeah, I will treasure that. Thank you, Greg. Easy Math says some of my analysis influenced by Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a good starting point. Yeah, yeah. I made a whole video about Thinking Fast and Slow. In fact, it was one of the first videos of mine that kind of did very well. I think it got like 50,000 views, I think, which at the time was like crazy for me. Um, so like, yeah, Thinking Fast and Slow was the first book that I ever read in behavioral economics, and it's like obviously it's written by a Nobel Prize winner. It'll be in like the front of every like bookstore that you go to, but yeah, a lot of the research in there is pretty shaky, like especially the priming stuff, which is like a good chunk of the book. Like all the stuff about priming. Priming is the idea that um, some kind of like subtle influence in your environment might cause you to make a completely different decision later on, or like it'll like prepare your brain to make a certain decision later on. A lot of that is based off really bad research. So there were some concepts like, oh, if we get people to think about words related to old people, like Florida, geriatric, stuff like that, then they'll end up walking slower when they go down a hallway. Like that research is total nonsense. Like it was based on like a tiny sample, doesn't replicate at all. There's other research that said that like the smell of fish in a room will make people more skeptical, and that was like a big headline finding from science. But then like, you know, stuff like that was also based off like really bad research. To be fair, I think research methods have improved a lot in like recent times. Um, you know, people, psychologists, especially these days, know about like statistical techniques. They're bringing in much bigger samples. So yeah, generally that kind of thing we see less and less of these days. But like a lot of Thinking Fast and Slow was based off a lot of quite old research from like pre 2000, and yeah, not great methods, unfortunately. But you know, Daniel Kahneman. That's not to slight Daniel Kahneman in any way, but he's obviously an absolute legend, and the founder of the field, and yeah, he's passed away now, unfortunately. But he, you know, we owe a lot to Daniel Kahneman, and he was actually a big advocate for reforming priming, at the priming research because he was aware of how problematic it is. Mr. Scrub has also donated $5, and Mr. Scrub, I am very grateful for that. But again, guys, please, you don't have to donate money to me. I appreciate it, obviously, but that is not the purpose of this stream. I am not in need of financial aid in any way. So Yeah, please do not feel obliged to donate any money to me at all. Your presence here is more than enough. Thank you, Mr. Scrubdo. That is very kind. Um, Jasna says the problem is that there is too much research, but rather that researchers get rewarded for positive results rather than negative results. Yeah, I totally agree. He says this encourages misrepresentation of data and results. I totally agree. It's like the whole point of science is to find out what is true and what is not true. And so half of that is going to be not true, at least, right? And so the fact that you get punished for research that shows that something isn't true and that stuff like that hardly ever gets published is horrible. And is also a big reason why replication studies often don't get published. The replication studies often don't get published because if there's a replication of a well-known thing and then the result is negative, then it's negative, and so then the journal doesn't want to publish it. But knowing that that thing that people used to think was true is actually not true is really important, right? And so that should get published. And then so then that discourages then the incentive for researchers are like, well, I have, X amount of funding. Do I want to allocate it to try and replicate a study which, if it comes out negative, won't get published? Like the incentive system is totally backwards, right? Like that's not what we want from scientists. Foucault called it lensification, says Catalyst. Such an abundance of research that you can cherry pick your argument with peer-reviewed resources. Yeah, exactly. Mr. Scrub says, better to have some healthy skepticism and question the information presented to us rather than blindly believe. Yeah, it's true. There's a balance to be struck, obviously. It's like, you know, there's a lot of very intelligent scientists who are good people. And like, if they, like you can't expect to be an expert in everything, right? So like um, if you're a plumber, right, and I have a problem with my plumbing, then like I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to tell me accurate information about how the problem with my plumbing and to fix it accordingly, right? Because it would be stupid for me to not do that. And so, in a similar way, like if there is, um, you know, if there's a field of science that is important and a bunch of very well qualified intelligent scientists are saying, oh, we should probably do this, then more likely than not that's the right thing to do. But that's not to say that you have to blindly follow everything. And I would especially be skeptical of stuff that sounds too good to be true, because often the times it is. And you got to remember what the incentives of the media are as well. So if the media is sensationalizing a certain finding, then that is extra reason to be skeptical. um, and that's not to say like that it's all going to be wrong, but like definitely if you do have access to like the paper, like look at the methods, right, and see if it looks legit. At least that's at least a good first sort of check to see if it at least sort of lines up, right? Easy Mass makes a good point about lawsuits. Yeah, I am very worried about that for real. I mean, obviously, like um not making too many friends with academics with the content that I make. And so yeah, like I know CoffeeZilla's getting sued. I don't obviously I'm hoping that I don't get sued. I try to be quite careful with my videos. Like I never outright accuse anyone of being guilty because I don't. Well, firstly, I can't. I don't have that information. But also for this legal reason, I try not to. I just say like, this is the evidence. What do you think? Right? Or in my opinion, this is what seems to be the case. But it's always in my opinion. It's not like definitive. Sambin says, am I in academia? I'm not. That is why I'm able to make the content that I make, because I'm not bound by the, if I worked for Stanford, I couldn't make a video saying that Stanford is terrible, right? So I work for a bank in the UK called NatWest. Um, but so I'm not tied to academia. I've gone to university. I have a degree. I have a master's degree, and obviously I read lots of research and I talk to lots of researchers, and I have lots of friends with PhDs and so on. But no, I'm not funded. Like, I don't rely on academia for my life. Dad says, "Is YouTube my full-time job?" No, I have another job. I work at a bank. Greg says, I love finding good channels. Cheers, mate. Appreciate that. Helios says, yo, Pete, how is behavioral science doing in UK? Did the hype die down? It seems to have died down a little. It's not, but I think also there's a lot more proof that behavioral science can be valuable to businesses and to government. as well. So it's kind of like a mix where, like, yes, there's less unvalidated hype, but there's also a lot more proof that it's useful. So yeah, it's definitely not dead, if that's the question. Any introductory courses, resources to learn behavioral science from? Lots of good books. I recommend um, Rory's book, or Nudge. Obviously, read Nudge. Read Nudge if you haven't read Nudge. Read Rory's book, Alchemy. Read Sam Tatum's book, Evolutionary Ideas. There's a couple of courses online. I haven't done any of them, so I can't recommend them. Yeah, and watch my channel. Watch my old videos. Lots of behavioral science stuff. Risk says, love your videos, Pete. Keep up the evidence-based content. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. Ernesto says, hi, Pete. Following from Brazil. Thank you. I love how international our audience is. It's like so cool. I get sometimes I get messages from people from like really like countries that I don't know anybody else from, and that's like really, really cool. So yeah, I appreciate all of you tuning in from all over the world, all different time zones. I appreciate that. Gitford says, Ari Little Albert, can you consider exploring more corrosive methodologies with neurotech? This will become the norm in the home in dreams. Yeah. Yeah, the Little Albert video didn't do as well as I hoped. But it's definitely like a really interesting study, and like one of the most horrific things to ever like happen in science, that like this poor child was just so traumatized by scientists for like basically no good reason. So yeah, yeah, I might look into more of these methodology based things. The tough thing is though, like I have a pretty good handle on like what videos will do well and what won't do well. So there's lots of interesting topics or people that I could talk about that are like inherently interesting in themselves, but then like in terms of packaging that into a video with a title and a thumbnail that I know that more people will click on beyond like you guys who are like my core fans, um, it's pretty tough, and it's pretty tough to strike that balance. So yeah, like I get lots of emails from people where they say like, oh, can you look into this researcher or that researcher or this person, and I'm like, I can, but then if I was to make a video on this person from this obscure university about a topic that's also pretty obscure, like I just know that that video won't do as well, unfortunately, even though objectively it's just as interesting as the stuff from Harvard or Stanford or another big name university like that. And I think that answers Jasnar's question as well. Yeah, it's like how do I choose what topics to prioritize? I choose the ones which I know people will be interested in watching, which are the ones from like top universities, or it's a Nobel Prize winner, or basically, yeah, there needs to be something high profile about it. If it's an obscure researcher from an obscure university, I probably won't cover it. How about some videos on all the shady things banks do? I can tell you, as someone who works at a bank, that at least for my bank, from what I've seen, there's nothing particularly shady going on. But yeah, so yeah, no videos planned on that. What's the subscriber count now? Let's do a quick refresh. 99937. So guys, help me out. If you got a spare Google account, subscribe. If you've watched a bunch of my videos and you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Go subscribe. And help me get to 100K. I'd really appreciate it. Glad to know behavioral science is dead. Just got into Warwick, lol. Honestly, shouldn't have mentioned you in my SOP. No, I'm friendly with all the guys from Warwick. So yeah, don't be afraid to mention me. They're all good dudes, and no regrets doing that degree at all. It's really good. Lucy is also from Brazil. Your channel is one of the most important ones on YouTube. Congratulations. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Lucy. Appreciate that. Mr. Scrub says, all good, mate. Just a small token of appreciation for the work you have done. Appreciate that, Mr. Scrub. Angelo says, hi, Pete from Curacao here. I love your Academy is Broken series. Are you exploring academic misconduct's impact? If so, I'd love to collaborate. Interested. Yeah, perhaps drop me an email, contactpetejudo@gmail.com, and let me know what you had in mind. CD45, your dive into scientific fraud actually helps the community a lot by popularizing the scandals that would have been kept within the niches of each field. Keep the trend growing. Thank you. That's why I do it. To be honest, It's actually quite tiring. It's quite tiring talking about scandals and like it's like pretty negative content, and I have to dive very deep into it for each video. Like I have to do a lot of research, and it's a bit depressing. But I do it because I know it's benefiting the community. I know that highlighting these things is not only discouraging academics from doing it in the first place, but it's also like helping share like the different methods that bad actors are using to bypass the safeties of the system. So um, yeah, thank you for your support, and I'm glad that you think it's doing good. AG says, I want to get a behavioral science consultancy job in the UK. I want to apply behavioral science for social impact in gender, and I'm also open to working with businesses and government. Any suggestions on how to find jobs? My top advice is always to get qualified first, get a degree in psychology or economics, and then if you can do a master's, or if you have experience already working in consulting, I think try and get a job in a consultancy, behavioral science consultancy, and then from there, once you've done a bit of consulting for a year or two, it's a lot easier to get a job in other specific fields. Oh, there, Stephen, do you do behavioral economics at your bank? Can you give some examples? I do behavioral economics at my bank. I can't do it. I can't give you any specific examples. Um, But yeah, I'm basically mostly focused on helping the bank produce good customer outcomes. So like making sure that products are actually working for people, that people are in. Um, uh, yeah, I can't give you anything that's too specific, but yeah, I basically try and make sure that people who bank with my bank are thriving. That's like my main focus. Hey Ahmed, Saad dude. Pratik says, "Hey Pete, how you doing? I'm good, buddy. I'm good." He says, "I'm looking good today. I appreciate that. If I could see you, I'm sure you're looking good too, but I can't see you. But thank you. I appreciate it." Yeah, we're trying to get to 100K. We're at 99937. If you guys would like to help, I would appreciate that. Go subscribe and hang out. But this is a Q&A. So if you want to ask me a question, drop a question in the chat. Um, It can be about my videos, it can be about me, whatever you want, whatever's on your mind. Feel free to ask me a question. Bjorn Larson says, are people in academics looking at you as a potentially dangerous reporter, and how has mainstream media responded to your investigations if you have contacted them? I haven't had any direct contact with mainstream media. From what I can tell from my comments section, academia has responded very positively in general to my content because I think most scientists are good people, right? Most scientists want to do the right thing, and most scientists want get into the field of science because they genuinely love science and they love the scientific method and what it means for the world. But so yeah, so generally most of the community has been very grateful. I've had a lot of people comment that, like, say, "Oh, I have a PhD and I have this experience," or whatever, or "I'm in this top university and I have this experience," and they're grateful for me sort of bringing that kind of thing to a larger audience, to a more general audience. So yeah, it's been generally very positive. Obviously, if you're a bad researcher or you have been tempted to do some dodgy stuff in the past, then yeah, I'm obviously not somebody whose feed you want to end up on. Um, but you know, I try to be as objective as possible. I present the evidence. I don't try draw any strong conclusions that are like definitive. You know, I always leave things a little bit open ended. So yeah. Pratik says, by the way, your thoughts on allegations made by about Mr. I haven't looked into it, to be honest. Anything to do with Mr. Beast. So yeah, no comment. But I'll look into it. Helios says, I just finished Sam Tatum's Evolutionary Ideas. Please do some book reviews once in a while too. Decoding / challenging the ideas of a book. Just a thought. Yeah, good shout. I'm glad you read Evolutionary Ideas. It's one of my favorites. I know Sam Tatum personally because he was my boss for a while. So yeah, top, really nice dude, really smart, and yeah, excellent book. Um, so yeah, I might do some book reviews. I was thinking of doing. Do you guys know Matthew Walker? He's a sleep researcher who's quite famous. He has like a masterclass, and I think he has some TED talks that are pretty popular. So he wrote a book called Why We Sleep, and I think people like Matt Diavella and um, Ali Abdal have talked about this book before. So it's got quite a lot of like publicity on YouTube. Um, yeah, it's generally a good book. I read it, so I might review it. There are actually some pretty strong claims that he makes in the book that I've heard don't totally line up in terms of the methodology. I take that with a pinch of salt. I do need to look more into it. Yeah, some of the science is a bit shaky, Greg. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, I will look into it a bit more. But yeah, that's definitely one idea that's in the pipeline. Roughneck says Francesca Gino biggest op. You say that, but like I've also made some videos in support of Francesca Gino as well. You know, showing you the evidence that she's presented as part of her defense, and saying that I think some of it is somewhat convincing. Um, right now, on balance, I think that the evidence from Data Colada and from Harvard is coming out more convincing to me. But I'm not a legal expert by any means. So yeah, um, that's that's what we're looking at. Pratik says, honestly, you're the one who introduced me to behavioral science. You've been my gateway into this field. Thanks, mate. I appreciate you, and I'm glad that I was able to introduce you to behavioral science. I still love behavioral science. I still call myself a behavioral scientist, despite a lot of this stuff coming out. Um, I practice behavioral science every day in my work, and I think it's very valuable. So, yeah, I'm glad I was able to introduce you to the field. AG says, to what extent is maths important if you want to become a behavioral science consultant anywhere? It's pretty important. I think if you're not good at maths, if you're not able to if you at least don't, sorry, let me rephrase this. If you don't know how to at least run a real statistically robust trial, you're pretty limited in the kind of work that you can get. You can do like the creative stuff, like coming up with ideas for people, but it's definitely much better to have a little bit of that statistical training, which you'll get if you do any kind of formal degree in behavioral science or psychology or economics. You should receive that kind of training, and so yeah, as long as you do that, you'll be fine. Hmm. Leon says, "Am I watching the Olympics? What do you think about the doping allegations against the USA team?" I haven't heard of the doping allegations. I have been watching the Olympics. I watch the gymnastics. I love Simone Biles. What an absolute legend. Um, don't know anything about the doping. I know that doping is probably a lot more common than people think. I'm sure a lot of you have seen Icarus, the documentary, but it's not just the Russian team. It is like a lot of other teams as well. There's a really good I think is it Wired or Business Insider? One of them made a video with a guy who was in charge of the doping in the Olympics, in previous Olympics, and he showed how easy it was. Basically, the way it works is that you give athletes drugs that improve their performance in training, but then you cycle them off it early enough before the Olympic testing, so that by the time they test before the Olympics, it's not showing up in their bloodstream. But all the benefit comes in training, so they don't need it for the actual competing anyway. Like all the benefits come from the training. So yeah, that's I I think that's pretty common. I don't know what the anti-doping practices were for the Paris Olympics, and if they did randomized testing, and if they did do randomized testing, how randomized was it? How frequent was it? How long before the event, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I have no idea. But anyway, yes, Simone Biles, what a legend. Love her. Um, Jasna says, as a scientific editor in the field of publication ethics, I can confirm that people in my field greatly appreciate the work done by yourself and other science sleuths. Keep up the great work. Thank you, mate. Yeah. Also, like I just report, right? I just report. So I kind of do the easy stuff. The really hard work is done by the sleuths, people like Elizabeth Bick or the guys at Data Colada, for example, who are like diving into the actual data and the papers, and they're like trawling through it, looking at all the individual bits of evidence and finding the discrepancies. Like those are the real heroes. Like I'm just the guy who makes YouTube videos about it, right? Um, which I guess is important. I mean, I like to think it's important too because I get the word out, but it's definitely not as labor intensive as what these guys are doing. So, um, yeah, I kind of owe everything to them, to be honest. Igor Lavrov says, to be fair, this highlights how poorly trained behavioral scientists are in basic statistics. Any math or stats undergrad student would fake data more realistically through a mixture of distributions. Yeah, you're not wrong, but also, I am confident that people like Francesca Gino are incredibly intelligent and are very well versed in maths and statistics. But the thing is, like most scientific studies just don't get checked, right? How many people actually check the data for stuff like this in most of your studies? Like very, very hardly ever, right? So like I'm sure if you're a fraudster, I'm not saying again caveat, I'm not saying Francesca Gino is for sure. Um, but like, if you're a fraudster and you're trying to manipulate your data, you will get lazy, right? Surely you'll get lazy and be like, it probably won't get checked anyway, so I'm just gonna like just chuck it out there and see what happens. But you know, I, yeah, like most of the time, you will actually get away with it, right? But of course, you only need to get caught once for it to look, for things to go bad for you. So yeah, Bjorn Larsen says, aren't researchers who have wasted their time and prestige trying to build upon that then turns out to have been a fraud very upset? How do they react? What are they doing about it? Any support? Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can only speak from my own experience, right? So I'm somebody who basically previous to stumbling on all of this fraud stuff, I was someone who had my entire identity basically tied into behavioral science. And then it turned out that a lot of the researchers I looked up to, Francesca Gino, Dan Ariely, who I haven't yet made a video about for various reasons. A lot of their research wasn't very solid, and then a lot of Daniel Kahneman, well, not Kahneman's work, but the work that Kahneman cited in Thinking Fast and Slow was not very well supported. And then that was kind of it is like it kind of messes you up. It's kind of it feels I imagine it's what like um aspiring athletes feel if they get injured and they can no longer participate in the sport. It's kind of that feeling. It's like imagine you're like trying to be like the world's greatest football player, and then you're like on track to do that, and your whole identity is being a football player, and then you break your leg, and you can never play football the same again. And you know, it's like it is pretty like world like it's very emotionally distressing, to be honest. But I think here's my solution for people in general facing a similar issue, whether you're an academic or from another field, which is be good at two things, right? It's like that's me quoting my old boss Rory Sutherland verbatim, which is be good at two things, so that if one thing falls away, that at least you have another thing, right? Beyond Storm Chasing donated $10, which you don't very generous. Thank you, Beyond Storm Chasing. That is very generous of you, and I appreciate it. But guys, you don't have to donate money to me for real. Like I'm not asking for money here. I'm not in need of financial aid. So, but I appreciate it beyond the storm chasing. Uh, in fact, if you do want to donate, I'll tally up however much money people donate in this stream, and I'll donate it all to charity. If you want to donate, if you feel like that's what you want to do, but absolutely no, not in need of financial aid. So I appreciate it. Thank you. But he says, it's been great to see your channel grow. This honestly isn't the niche I expected you to occupy. I found your channel through VR interests. Oh my goodness. I love VR. In fact, here's my Oculus Quest Pro. And yeah, I made a couple of videos about that about the Apple I forgot the name of it now. Apple Vision Pro. And I like I worked in behavioral science and marketing for a while, so I'm very interested in marketing as well as in science, and so that was kind of my commentary on that. And I've written some thought leadership pieces on VR for Ogilvy in the past, but yeah, no VR content planned for the near future. I think I'm a bit too far removed from that now. Would feel a bit weird to make a video about VR at this point. AG says, what's the difference between behavioral science and psychology? Does a master's in psychology work? Do I need a master's in science? Behavioral science is a subfield of psychology, I would argue, where psychology is very broad. It covers lots of different things like mental health and mental illness and loads of different criminal psychology, like loads of different things. Behavioral science is specifically focused on how do we change people's behavior and how do we encourage people to engage in behaviors that are beneficial to them or to society. So yeah, it's very specific subfield of psychology, but that's the difference. Pratik says, if you could design an experiment to test the effects of laughter on productivity, What would be your hypothesis and how would you set it up? Ooh, tough one. Yeah, because you have to get genuine laughter, right? And that's pretty hard to control for. Um, you could do an experiment on comedy, maybe. Man, it's pretty tough. Anyway, I would obviously just do a randomized control trial. So allocate some people to do some kind of productivity task. Maybe like they have to solve some math puzzles, for example. So they have to solve like 20 math puzzles, and then I'd be like, okay, you do the math puzzles timed without the comedy, and then you guys go to a comedy show and then laugh a bit, and then we'll do the math puzzles, and then we'll see who does them faster and who does them more accurately. That would be like at a very basic level. That's how I would set it up. Helios says I should do these live streams more regularly. You know what? I might do. I used to do them every week, and then it just was like it was too. I found it to be just like too much. It's like yeah, it was too much to do it every week and also make videos every week. So yeah, but I might do them a bit more often. It's nice that now we have a large enough audience where there's like lots of you here and the chat is active, and so I have like lots of things to talk about. There's very little like dead time in the middle. So yeah, I appreciate that. Greg Canny says it's like you're an ex-Mormon or ex-Scientologist. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is kind of the feeling. Like when you're so invested in a particular doctrine, right? It's literally like a doctrine, and then suddenly you escape from it, and it's like, oh man, it's like really tough. It's really tough psychologically, and you kind of have to readjust. And it's tough because not only do you lose what you believe in, but there's people involved, right? There's people, your friends, who you used to collaborate with and talk with and hang out with, and they now believe something which you no longer believe in, and that is a big part of why it's so difficult to escape those things. So whether that's a religion or a scientific doctrine, like the mechanism is quite similar. Maybe I imagine it's less intense than compared to losing your religion, but it's still pretty intense. Bjorn says, "What would you want to be done to restore peer reviews, and what do you predict will happen with peer reviews in the next decade or so?" Good question. I talked to another scientist who was looking into this actually, and he tried an intervention where he would get people to peer review peer reviews, and when they did that, they thought, oh, maybe that would improve the quality of peer review. But it turns out whatever problems you initially had with peer review, you also get when people peer review, and so that is not a solution. Um, so what do I think will happen? I think AI can help this actually. So there's a lot of like low hanging fruit when it comes to improving scientific integrity, like uh, you know, AI software that detects duplicate images, things like image twin and proofing. That should any journal that publishes scientific images should be using software like that. I don't. It's just like a no-brainer. And then there should also be software developed that can detect AI images, software that's developed that can detect AI sounding language, or you can. I mean, it's quite easy to build a program that searches for the words um, as an AI algorithm, right? And like the number of papers that have been published with that specific text in it, because that's what ChatGPT likes to say, is ridiculous. And so, stuff like that is low hanging fruit, right? That should be done immediately. And then beyond that, um, I would hope that there's more of a culture of encouraging researchers to publish negative results. It's not really talking about peer review so much, but like there are some journals, for example, I think PLOS One is one of them, where if you're a scientist, you can like ask for your paper to be. They agree to put. You submit your methods and you submit everything about your paper. You submit everything about your paper except for the results, and then the journal chooses to publish or not publish based off that alone, and then whether it's positive or negative, it still gets published. And I think that kind of practice is really great. And so I would hope that more journals adopt that kind of thing. Um, Esmeralda says, "Hi Pete, I'm here from Dallas, Texas. Howdy. Thanks for joining. We need a Bobby Broccoli collab. I've not talked to Bobby Broccoli. But I love his videos, and they're so creative the way he films them and animates them. Like I think they're super clever. So yeah, maybe I'll reach out to Bobby Broccoli. Uh, Usama's here. Guys, if Usama has edited many of the videos that you've watched on my channel. He is an absolute legend, really good editor. So yeah, everyone say hi to Usama. Amma says, I'm quite funny. I'll help on the laughter. ICT. Cheers, mate. Appreciate that. Luis says, hi from Argentina. Hello. Hello, Luis. Top Gym Rat says, I have a gym session in 9 minutes, but dropping by to say hello. Love your channel. Appreciate that, man. Go get those gains. Napoleon says, as for behavioral sciences and marketing, Gad Saad does a lot on it in his actual research, especially with an evolutionary psychology focus. Yeah, evolutionary psychology is so cool. If you guys don't know what that is, it's like um, it's basically like trying to figure out why people do things based off like evolutionary, what makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. Like why do we find certain people attractive, or why do we find certain foods appealing, for example, and then trying to figure that out from an evolutionary point of view, and then testing that hypothesis. Um, so, for example, like the research into like why we find fatty and salty foods really delicious is because those were like rare nutrients when we were evolving, right? Or like why do we find bitter foods repulsive? And it's because bitter is like a very good signal that like something is poisonous, right? And so like evolutionary psychology, I think is really cool, and I think it goes a lot more beyond food. But yeah, love evolutionary psychology, super cool. AG says, just want to say thank you. You're a blessing, man. Appreciate that, man. That's very kind. Beyond Storm Chasing says, recently in skeptic spaces, more people are comparing behavioral science to stuff like phrenology. The reputation of behavioral science as a whole seems to be declining. Yeah, it's definitely in a bit of a rough spot. I think calling it phrenology is a bit of a stretch. Phrenology is like racist, you know, racist psychology. No, not. I don't think it's. I wouldn't go that far. But I would say that yeah, behavioral science, because of the scandals, is in a bit of a rough spot. But I don't think the solution to that is to sweep it under the rug. I think that's like not the attitude that we want to encourage in the field. I think what we want to do is bring all these things to the light, disinfect the field, and then what we're left with are the high quality, it's the high quality research. Luis says, "What happened with Gina?" You guys keep actually, I should say you, not all of you guys, but like a lot of people keep calling her Gina. It's Gino, Gino. Francesca Gino is her name. And what happened with her? As far as I know, the lawsuit is still going on. There's been no conclusion to it yet. So yeah, we don't know. Data Cloud are still defending themselves. So yeah, I guess we'll find out. Um, Ozo says, I just came across your stream and I was actually going to state how more academics are finally breaking from the establishment dogma that has started appearing in many aspects of all academia. Yeah, I think there's a lot of this. There's a lot of the academic system that is pretty dated, to be honest. I mean, there's a question to be asked, like, are journals even necessary? I know that's like quite a bold thing, but like, do you really need a journal? Can you just publish it online? Like, why do you need a journal? Like, what purpose does the journal even have? Right? Like, I don't know. All right. When I worked in cancer research, we knew of one multi-published author who traveled around institutions as a writer for hire. What do you think of that sort of setup? I mean, I think it's fine if they're actually doing the research, right? Like if their name's going to be attached to the research, you would want them to actually be involved in the research. If they travel around, that's fine. Yeah, nothing wrong with it. Um, Wow, lots of questions. Napoleon, you think that string theory is not a. Napoleon says there are many physicists heavily invested in keeping string theory a paradigm. I've not heard about this, but that's very interesting. Have I followed Domenico Pratico's Alzheimer's research? Ernesto asks. I have not. I have no idea who that is, I'm afraid. Thoughts on P and significance? Does it need rethinking? Why are people calling for a change on it? So if you don't know what p-values are, they're generally how scientists in medicine and in behavioral science test for statistical significance. I think The over reliance on p less than 0.05 for significance is a bit silly. Like, it's completely arbitrary, but yet it's become such a standard within the industry. And I think it's harmful for it to be it's harmful for that to be such a hard barrier to statistical significance, especially when your publication is reliant on you having statistical significance. And it's like, okay, p 0.05 is the barrier, like less than 0.05 is the barrier. If I get 0.052, right, I'm just outside the barrier, and so I'm not statistically significant. And it's like, well, that seems a bit silly, right? Like, why is that the case? And surely it depends on the context and everything. So yeah, it's a bit silly. So yeah, I do think it should be changed, or at least if that's not changed, then um, journals should start publishing stuff that isn't p less than 0.05. I think that's an easy fix. Mr. Scrub says, I've heard folk speak of academia as being ideologically captured. What are your thoughts on this? Is there any risk that research is being manipulated to move societally along an ideological path? I think that sounds like a conspiracy theory. Um, that being said, most top universities have kind of a similar culture, which makes sense, right? Because professors move between these top universities, and so they end up kind of becoming a little bit of an echo chamber for each other. So there's a little bit of that, but do I think that there's some kind of Illuminati type organization driving everything at the top and directing science at a micro level? No, I don't think so. I think it's way too big. There's way too many actors involved for that to be the case. I think there's a broken system, right? There's a broken system of incentives, and that can move a lot of people in a certain direction. But um, to say that it's like all planned out by some overarching figure, no, I don't think so. Kenzo says, "Hi Pete, I love your videos. Thanks, mate. I appreciate it." GG says, "Can I call you daddy?" No. Hard no to that one. Sorry, mate. Pratik says, "Have I ever visited Asia? Any plans for the future?" Yeah, I mean, you can tell I am Asian. My family's from Malaysia and Indonesia, so yeah, I've been there a bunch of times. Been to Singapore, been to Hong Kong, been to China. Um, yeah, been to Thailand, been to Vietnam. So yeah, I've been all over Asia. I haven't been to India yet, so I would love to go to India one day. But or yeah, I haven't been to India, haven't been to Pakistan, haven't been to Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, anywhere in that region. So yeah, I would love to do that. But yeah, I've been to like Southeast Asia a lot. Um, This may be outside the scope, but do you have any suggestions for getting work published outside of the journal system that is more technical, as in is too complicated for the news media? Uh, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by that, Andrew Price. But I talk. What I like to do with because YouTube is a great platform for finding the people who are interested in your content. I try to go in a lot more depth into like the methods and the research than you would find on other news outlets. Like for example, if you look at the coverage of Mark Tessier Levine, so he was like the Stanford president who was caught with duplicate images in his work. Um, that the coverage of that from mainstream media was pretty bad. Like or not bad, but like, it was very surface level. They didn't really explain why what you're looking at in the papers is actually problematic. So that's the difference that I try to make in my videos, is that I show you the evidence. I don't treat you like an idiot. I don't treat my audience like idiots. I'm like, look at this evidence. Look, you can see it. Like you can see the things that look dodgy here, and then uh, and so I think that's me going beyond what like typical news media goes to. I don't shy away from the complication. I try to explain it. Cameron says, I was a science major as an undergrad and fell for bro science. I almost overdosed on nootropics based on fraudulent papers. Your channel helps the world. Good, mate. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't overdose. And yeah, very dangerous stuff. Beyond the Storm, Chasing says, Angela Collier has a great video about string theory that's worth your time to watch. All right, email it to me, mate. I'll check it out. The academics papers are dead. No, I mean, academia is not going to die. It's too big to die, and I don't think it should. Right? I just think it needs reform. Yeah, Brad, Duplessis, love your show and work. Appreciate that, Brad. Appreciate it. Alison, is there any corner of behavioral science that's focused on reproducibility? Yeah, of course. I mean, a lot of behavioral scientists are interested in reproducibility. There's a lot of good practices like pre-registration, for example, that is like a really good practice. And also just like and having journals encouraging or making mandatory the publication of people's data as well as the results of the paper. I think is a good step forward. So yeah, there are lots of efforts from different pockets of the industry, but definitely not a problem that's fixed yet. Uh, Jose McDaniel says our entire government in the USA has been captured by big corporations. Not much of a leap to believe academia has been captured too. I don't know. Maybe you're right, but I am not qualified to comment on that. That is for sure. Edwin Hubble in the 1920s discovered intergalactic space and the expansion of the universe, all based on a pretty poor correlation of a few observations. But he was spot on, kind of opposite of fraud. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get lucky, right? And you know, all hypotheses by their nature are a hypothesis is just a guess, right? It's just a guess about what's going on, and so all great discoveries start out as a guess based on very little evidence. So yeah, Pratik says if I go to India, I can stay in his place. I appreciate that, Pratik. That is very kind of you. Poli says there's no need for a big conspiracy, but more convergence based on the population being more ideologically divided, amplified by social media. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong about that. I've made several videos about polarization before. My boss, actually, Alex Chesterfield, has a really great book on polarization. It's called Poles Apart, if you want to check it out. But like, yeah, social media definitely encourages polarization, algorithm-based news. Not to plug, I know you guys are probably sick of me plugging ground news in my videos, but ground news. Yeah, ground news is a great way to get your news instead of these algorithms because it's not going to drive that polarization in the same way. Yeah. Semantic, but P should be replaced with the symbol dollar. What? Okay. AG says, please tell me this. Can you name a few companies in the UK who have behavioral scientists, psychologists, have required behavioral scientists? There's loads, mate. Loads of companies. Basically, any top company in the world has used behavioral scientists in the past. Teams that have specific behavioral science teams like Headspace, Google, Spotify, the British government. Yeah, loads of companies, mate. Andrew Price says, has its foundations in the 1990s because of how the Soviet military-industrial complex dissolved. Many of the military developers went to work in games, specifically flight sims, VM, but it is hard. That sounds really interesting, and I need to look more into that. Usama Hamid, what's up, brother? Everyone say hello to Usama, please. He is my editor, and he is great. Beyond the Storms, Chasing says, the reason I recommend Angela Collier specifically is she is roughly in your niche. She talks extensively about academics and the problems with science communication. I will check her out. Shweni Wong says, amazing work, Pete. Thank you, Shweni. Appreciate that. John Storm's got a bail, but he says, congrats again. Thank you. Lind Tech says, I'm not a scientist, but I've been watching your channel for quite some time. It's interesting. Thank you. Appreciate it. Considering the main topic of your channel recently, would the behavior of scientists be a separate field of behavioral research, or is it already? It is a behavioral problem in part, but it is also a problem with economics, of incentives. It's a bit more than just behavioral science. So I don't think more research is necessarily needed that much, but instead people need to start taking some action. Bjorn Larsen, didn't scientific journals begin as collections of letters between individual researchers, such a small beginning, and now the big business / political scale of it, reform needed? Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Like it's ridiculous that certain journals hold so much power, right? Like Nature, Science, The Lancet. These journals have like so much power, and then and what's even crazier is that certain institutions require researchers to have a certain number of publications in these specific journals in order to be deemed as like worthy of the position they hold or worthy of a promotion that they're going for. And that's ridiculous. Like, why is that the why is that the litmus test for a good researcher? Why is it not um, the quality of the research itself? You know, like why is why are you trying to measure it by what journal it's in? Like, it seems really stupid. Um, Juan Pedro Mariano, hi Pete, been watching your videos and my sense of skepticism has been enhanced towards studies like even paper related press releases are not to be trusted too much as it can be sensationalist. Yeah, totally agree. If you weren't here earlier, I said like if you find if mainstream media, especially like tabloid media, is like reporting on a certain scientific discovery and it seems too good to be true or it seems like unusually surprising, um, take it with a grain of salt. Don't change your whole lifestyle because of it, because chances are it's not based on the most solid of stuff. If you have a bit more scientific training, you can look into it yourself. Look at the sample size at least. Look at the methodology. Look at the results and see like how legit does it seem, at least from a surface point of view, before you start making any big changes. RTN Joe, what's my perspective on the potential impact of increasing IQ drugs on human behavior and society in the future? Ooh, I would like to get some. And presuming there's no major side effects. But if there are, then maybe that's harmful. If not greed, what do you think is the cause of so much fraud in academia? Incentives. It's incentives. I think very few academics are inherently bad people or go into the field with the intention of being fraudulent and misleading. I think that's very unlikely the case. But I think that when you have a system that encourages that behavior through the incentive system, um, then that's the problem, right? So that's it's not greed, right? It's just like it's a requirement of the system that this is the fastest and easiest way to progress, is to be fraudulent, and so people will do it, right? Like it's just the path of least resistance. So yeah, uh, yeah. Charlotte Hill, you can't blame academics for wanting to be ambitious, right? You can't blame academics for wanting to progress, um, in their fields and in their institution. Like they're gonna want to progress. Charlotte Hill, is there actually scope for behavioral scientists to, in corporate world, like in monetary terms, will they paid high? Yeah, of course there is. Yeah, like I've done loads of work with the biggest companies in the world, brands that you buy every day, and yeah, they pay money for behavioral scientists for their insights and their research because it's valuable, right? It's valuable from a creative point of view. You can get to some really interesting ideas through behavioral science terms and behavioral science concepts. But it's also valuable because it's just a lot more scientific than what a lot of business does, which is basically like they do a bunch of tests without controls and everything. So, you know, I think behavioral scientists and the training that they have and the way that they think about problems is very valuable to a lot of companies and governments. And so, yeah, there's definitely a place for behavioral science in the corporate world. Napoleon says, I don't think you can increase IQ, just things like attention. Yes, I agree and disagree. You can increase attention and you can actually increase IQ. Believe it or not, I know people like to think that IQ is this thing that you're born with or that is like purely genetic, but it's not. You can increase IQ because IQ is just a score you get on a test, and you can study for an IQ test just like you can study for any other test. And so there's uh, it's called the Flynn effect if you want to look it up. But like the Flynn effect shows that people's IQ just seems to be increasing over time, and like you would expect if it's just something that you're born with that's purely genetic and not subject to any other factors, then that wouldn't happen. But it does happen. So why does it happen? Right? Is it because people are getting better at taking IQ tests? Is it because now people's nutrition is better? Is it because education is better now? Right? Like there are things you can do to increase people's IQ, and maybe a drug could do that as well. Uh, Rush696 says, just wanted to say I appreciate seeing a bright young man challenging the problems in science right now while staying full clear of audience capture mediated conspiratorial thinking. Keep it up. Thank you. I'm glad you think I'm a bright young man. That's very flattering. Thank you. Funny says, if you have no morals, join the mobile games industry. I actually used to work at mobile games, so I guess I have no morals. But I did an internship for 3 months when I was at university in a mobile games company, and it was actually really fun. It was really fun. We'd made a we'd make a bunch of like those kind of like free games that you download that are like top of the app store, um, and it was super creative and interesting. So yeah. RTN Joe says, "Let's go. I'm curious how the world would handle this. I'm concerned that fear of inequality might shut it down, even though the potential benefits are huge." I'm assuming you're referencing something that I said earlier, but I'm not sure which. So, uh, yeah, don't know how to respond to that one. Sorry. Alison says, "Are there reputable peer reviewing slash auditing firms that papers can be voluntarily submitted to for more thorough reviews?" No, there isn't, but that is a great idea. Or maybe there are, and I don't know about them. But yeah, no, peer review is usually done by other researchers in the field. They often don't get paid for it, which is also a thing that's a problem. Uh, and they are supposed to read through these papers, and some people take it really seriously. And I've had people in my comments before who are peer reviewers themselves, and they're like, "I'm a peer reviewer, and I take all my peer reviews really seriously, and I make sure that everything's really good." And like, um, and I'm like, I'm sure you do, right? And great, good for you. And I'm glad that you're a person who is doing that. But like, but like, not everybody does that, right? Like, not everybody who has your job takes it as seriously as you do, unfortunately. And that's why we end up with these problems. Juan says, "Do journals discriminate against people who work as unaffiliated researchers or treat them with much higher scrutiny as they're not part of the network?" It does happen. It's not a universal thing. It depends on how the journal works. Sometimes journals uh, are blind, so that the peer reviewer or the journal editor doesn't know who the researcher is. I think that's a good practice that should continue. Some journals have a kind of like um, what's the word? It's kind of they have like a club basically where there's like a few researchers who all peer review each other, and they basically just say yes, 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 yes to each other, and that helps them get through. And then people who are not part of that club basically don't benefit from that, and so then the people who are part of that club end up having a lot more work published as a result. So yeah, that kind of thing happens a lot. I've heard it happens in computer science. Actually, there's a group of computer science researchers who do it. I can't remember the name of the journal now, but yeah, it is a thing. Um, Bjorn says journals aren't regulated by laws much, right? It's basically voluntary. Is the system created by the researchers themselves? If so, how are researchers not corrupted by it, by university finance? Yeah, I mean, uh, yeah, researchers who aren't corrupted by it aren't corrupted because they're good people, basically. Right? They're good people who have very strong self will, or maybe they're just in a good place, in life, and so they don't feel the need or whatever. And so, that's there's always good apples, which is great. But yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, peer review is definitely voluntary, or basically it's voluntary. Um, and there have been some efforts to make it less voluntary, like some incentives, like they give reviewers like badges and stuff, but usually they reward like quantity rather than quality. And so that's also not a great incentive system, because then people just go yes, yes, yes to everything that they peer review, and then they don't really pay much attention. They don't really like scrutinize it properly, and so then it just kind of passes through without any real checks, and then that is also a problem. Yeah, I've also had many PhD students go into my comments and be like, I had my PhD thesis peer reviewed, and it was absolute hell. And I had to rewrite my entire thing. And it took me a whole year to do it. And how dare you say that peer reviewers don't check the work, because they clearly do. And like, uh, you know, again, it's like it's not a universal thing. Like sometimes they check it really carefully. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're way too harsh, but sometimes they're not harsh enough. Um, Being too harsh is obviously annoying for you if you're the researcher who's having your work heavily scrutinized, but it's definitely not as problematic for science as a whole as people not being harsh enough on stuff that is clearly nonsense, right? So I need to have a drink of water. Jasnar says the incentives go beyond just the institute and also involve funders. Authors who have high pub number are more likely to get grants approved, and so they bring in more money to the university. Absolutely, yeah. And that's a silly way to have to distribute grants, right? It's like, oh yeah, let's just give it to the person who has published the most stuff. Like maybe that's one metric that should go into your equation, but it shouldn't be the only one. Um, and so yeah, it's a bit silly. RTNJ says, sorry, it was me earlier asking about IQ drugs. Curious how the world would handle this. I'm concerned that fear of inequality might shut it down, even though the potential benefits are huge. It's an interesting question. I haven't really thought much about it, to be honest. But yeah, you do have to think about distribution, like how, is it fair? I mean, it probably would just go to like the richest countries first, right? And then that doesn't seem that fair. But then also, that's capitalism. So I don't know. And Anonymistiger says, your critiques of science are great. Do you think the rampant fraud we are seeing is due to increased scrutiny or an increase in bad behavior or both? I think it is due to a lack of scrutiny, a bad incentive system, and just a greater volume of research. There's just so much more research coming out as time goes on. Every year, there's more universities, there's more researchers, there's more people publishing stuff, and so it gets harder and harder to manage. The club, also known as peer review rings. Yeah, exactly. Peer review rings. I approve you, you approve me. You know, it's silly. Can you make a video on disturbing medical practices from the past? I mean, I did the lobotomy video, which went crazy viral, got like over 1 million views. So, um, I might, if there's one that's interesting. I mean, since I'm someone who's trained in psychology, I'm most interested in stuff that is to do with people's brains. Um, So yeah, maybe I'll make more stuff on that in the future. Andrew Price says, well, the modern journal started with Salvia by Robert Maxwell of the Daily Mirror and Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Interesting. Lil Fupa, hello. Hello. Charlotte says, how can one get started with behavioral science? I'm from a country where there's not much opportunities for formal behavioral science education. So if I want to self-study, how can I get started like a learning roadmap? I would start with books. Books are the easiest one. I have a few recommended on my website if you're interested. And then, in addition to books, you can try to do some online courses. And then, probably the easy if you can. I know it's not financially viable for a lot of people, but if you can study in the UK or the US or somewhere where behavioral science has a bit more of a presence, then your chance of getting into the industry is a lot better. If it's not in your country, it is very difficult. Alison, do researchers have a highly do researchers have to be highly published to become a peer reviewer? Perhaps the people with more ethical mindsets have a harder time getting published. That's a good question that I do not know the answer to. I imagine it's different journal to journal. So yeah, no idea. What's my take on Neuralink developments? I think it is really impressive and scary. um, was that thing the other day? They were able to like was it a pig or a dog that couldn't walk and they got it to be able to walk again? Like that's absolutely bonkers. So yeah, um, yeah, very cool, very scary. Old McDirtfinger, what a name. German here. Do you think MIT is less prone to faking publications, etc., as they don't seem to be as much reliant on prestige, etc.? Uh, I don't think that they're less prone. I imagine any high level institution is just as prone as the other. I've shown in previous videos before that it's not just the so-called soft sciences like behavioral science that are prone to this kind of fraud, but also physics and other very unapologetically hard sciences also are prone to this kind of thing. The incentives are the same, and so if the incentives are the same, yeah, just as prone, I would imagine. That being said, I don't think I've covered anyone from MIT on this channel, so maybe they got something going on there that's working. Andrew Price says Dr. Cotton in New Jersey thought that psychological issues were caused by infections in the body, would remove patients' teeth and organs until they got better against their will. Maybe a video. That is fascinating. I will check that out. That being said, though, I mean, I don't think you should remove people's organs and stuff. Definitely not against their will. But there is an unappreciated link between people's physical bodily health and their mental health. When people are depressed or anxious, I think people's first thought is that, oh, there must be something wrong going on with their life, right? It's like it's due to like some sort of event or situation that they're in. But I think a lot of the time it's probably due to things like lack of blood flow, or maybe there's mold in your house. And I think like these kind of other physical causes are probably a lot more common than people attribute to their illness as they should. And so I think like thinking about your physical health as a component of your mental health is something I'm a big advocate for. Albert Deffinger, as compared to other Ivy Leagues, yeah, possibly, especially if they're doing. Obviously, MIT do a lot more like engineering-based stuff, which I think is maybe a little less susceptible. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know is the answer. Um, Benjamin says, "Great to see you. Great to see you too, mate. Thanks for joining." Git Fode says, "Neurotech can deliver sensations, imagery, pain, the signals for trigeminal slash migrainous neuralgia." Man, that's a mouthful. It's a killer. Also, change of loyalty methodologies. I need to look more into it, to be honest. RTN Joe says, "Sorry, have to go, but your channel is amazing. Watch every episode. By the way, you look great." Thank you, RTN Joe. I appreciate that. I have no idea how to read your name. Quotach? You should make a video about reviewers doing a job in relation to Gino's pub. Yeah, I don't actually know who peer reviewed it, to be honest. So maybe that is something I should look into. Napoleon Fiana, discourse theory based fields still take Freudian psychology as fact. Yeah, that is ridiculous. Freudian psychology is nonsense. is nonsense, and unfortunately, a lot of people it still gets taught a lot, especially in like non. If there's like a degree that has a psychology module, for some reason they like to talk about Freudian psychology, which is insane to me. So like if you take like a business degree and then there's like you have like a business psychology module in that degree, they'll talk about Freudian psychology, and it's like why? It's like the worst, least scientific, really outdated theory. I don't know. It's yeah, and then these people come away and be like, oh yeah, all of psychology is stupid. And it's like, well yeah, of course it's stupid if all you learned about psychology is Freud. So yeah. Anyway, Gitfode says synthetic telepathy, Chinese struggle set. Okay, you're still talking about Neuralink. Yes, Neuralink. I don't know much about it beyond what I've seen on X. So yeah, I can't tell you too much. Bjorn Larson, is there any established branch of research, any institution that looks into fraudulent and scandalous substandard research? You could pioneer it and start up a fraudulent research journal. If I had time and resources, maybe I would. But at the moment, the only established branch of research that I know of is Elizabeth Bick, the one and only, the legend. Yeah, and if I mean, she's not the only one, but she's the most famous one. And there are other science sleuths, Data Colada, for example. But yeah, the more sleuths there are, the better. The thing is, a lot of these people do it voluntarily. It's not their job. And so yeah, like they just can't. You can't deal with the scale of the problem with a few volunteers. Like you need system level change. Isn't Freud's concept of projection empirically verified? I mean, I'm sure there are some Freud theories that are verified, but like all the stuff about people wanting to like sleep with their mum, I don't think is particularly verified. What is your opinion on studies about ADHD? Your channel is awesome. Greetings from Peru. Thank you, Ara. I haven't looked into any studies on ADHD. Maybe I should. Yeah, maybe I should. That's all I can give you. Sorry. Talkative Tommy TV. Do you have a favorite channel whose who does similar work to myself. Just wondering, not, but may not be based on societal belief. Bobby Broccoli, people have mentioned earlier. Bobby Broccoli did some great videos. If any of you saw my video on um, Jan Henrik Schön, who was a very fraudulent physicist who based the story of Jan Henrik Schön was that he was a crystals scientist, physicist, and he basically said that he'd come up with a crystal that could accomplish like everything that is like the gold standard in physics, um, like superconductors and like transistors and all this stuff. And so like yeah, Jan Henrik Schön, that my research for that video was very heavily based on Bobby Broccoli's videos, as well as some other online sources. So um, yeah, go check out Bobby Broccoli. He makes like his style is quite different to mine. He makes like really long videos, like hour long or like 40-minute long videos where he goes into like a lot of depth, and he has this cool like animation style where he like takes you through the timeline of things that have happened. So yeah, really cool creator, Bobby Broccoli. Anonymy Eustager says, don't be too hard on Freud. He's interesting. He wrote before psychology got science envy and used p-values as the sole measure of validity. Civilization and its contents is great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's from a different time. I'm not saying that he wasn't great for his time, but what I am saying is that if you're going to teach psychology in university today, why why are we only teaching Freud? you know, that can we teach something that's a little bit more contemporary, that has more contemporary methods, that is based off more solid evidence. That's all I'm saying. Old McDirtfinger, at what stage of your own education did you start feeling that academia is broken? Bachelor, master, PhD? Um, Post masters. I mean, it's when it all started with the Francesca Gina, the very first Francesca Gina video, the one that is now my most viewed video on this channel, where it was like, I've been in this field of behavioral science for a long time, and I believed it all. And there were a few rumblings of things going wrong. Daniel Kahneman's work had a few. There was a few. Not Kahneman's work. The work that Kahneman cited in Thinking Fast and Slow was quite problematic. And then Ariely had a little scandal come out a few years ago, and then that was like a bit disheartening. But it wasn't really until the Geno scandal that I was like, oh boy, this is like really bad. And then as I've been making this channel and as I've been like researching more for these videos, that's where I discovered the extent of the problem and how it's so much more beyond just behavioral science, right? It's in so many different fields. So yeah, it's not yeah, that's when it happened basically. Hmm. Carl says, your channel's analysis of academia resonates so much with my experience doing my PhD. Even with the double blind process, it never felt quite right. Thanks for reaffirming I'm not crazy. You are not crazy. And you're not the only person to tell me this. Even my people I work with have told me that, like, yeah, during my PhD, I was part of this lab, and the person who ran the lab was like really dodgy and like would just like throw papers in the bin when they didn't work out and stuff like that. And yeah, like it's a very open secret that this is how it works. Um, Carl taught most of physics is just frameworks to simply complex systems we don't fully understand that yields reasonably practical application. Uh, yeah, sure. Rush says, I feel like it's worth noting that even though the majority of Freud's specific ideas have been debunked, the entire modern field has been built on his foundation. I would disagree with that. It's a bit of an overstatement to say that the entire modern field has been built on Freud's ideas. Like, no, it hasn't. I mean, you know, so much of psychology has got nothing to do with what Freud talked about in his theories at all. So, uh, no, I reject that notion. Um, Rush says that's often how science works, building up a discipline by reaffirming, revising, and rejecting earlier work. Yeah, I agree. Bjorn says, what branches of research do you think suffer most from frauds, like medicine because of money, or behavioral psychology because of fraudsters? think it would be useful to learn something about it. Uh, Cancer research, believe it or not, cancer research is rife with absolute garbage. It's unbelievable. Um, and I think it's because there's so much money on it. There's so many journals that publish it, and it's so you can create papers about cancer research that are very systematic to produce. And so the biggest problem is paper mills, which I talked about in a previous video. So paper mills are these like shady third party organizations that produce fake papers and then they sell them off to the highest bidder. And a lot of them produce fake cancer research papers, and they sell them mostly to Chinese medical students who, because Chinese medical students are sometimes required to have a paper published in order to graduate from their degree. And so they just pay one of these paper mills to push out some nonsense paper and put their name on it. And so you end up with a bunch of cancer research that is just paper mill nonsense, like no research actually took place. Uh, and it's very, it makes, when I think about it, it makes me so angry because it's like, yeah, like I'm sure many of you know somebody who's been affected by cancer or who has passed away from cancer. It's just the worst thing. It's like the worst disease. And then to muddy actual real progress into solving cancer as an issue, it makes me so angry. Um, Napoleon Charlotte might be harder there, maybe abroad if you want to have a degree, but all the Anglophone countries are really expensive. Yeah, Charlotte. Yeah, it is very difficult. That being said, there are some more behavioral science companies that do work abroad. There are some in India. There are some in Africa. Um, I'm trying to think of the name. Busara. Look up Busara Center. Busara. Busara Center. They do a lot of work in lots of different countries around the world. I don't know where you're from, but maybe there's something near you. You can check that out. Git asks if I've read that book. I have not read that book. So yeah, uh, can't agree. But he says hard disagree. Behaviorism had more influence on modern psychology if we talk about old psy. Yeah. Um, the Napoleon says the research is cancer. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I mean, it's quite a good analogy because it's like a tumor of bad research filling up the literature, isn't it? It's like it just it multiplies uncontrollably because you have these paper mills just literally duplicating, right? Like producing the same thing but slightly different over and over and over again. And so it is quite reminiscent of a tumor, ironically. Um, Paper mills used to be big in cancer research, but now they are more common in systematic meta-analyses and other science that does not involve images. Is that true? That is very interesting, and that's probably because they're trying to get away from Elizabeth Book and the software that does similar things. So, um, yeah, very interesting. That's good to know. Maybe I'll look into that. Rush says, just to be clear, I'm including work that explicitly rejects Freud as in a sense derived from his work. In other words, without him, we don't. Yeah, sure, but like, I don't know. I just think there is absolutely no need to talk extensively about Freud in modern teachings of psychology, right? You can mention him, sure, but you don't need to just teach his theories. Uh, as for first world countries, Germany is the cheapest as far as tuitions go. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I heard. Isn't Germany free for a lot of? Isn't university in Germany free in a lot of places? Maybe it's just for EU people. I don't know. Yeah. How do you guys feel about university tuition? How is that as a topic? Also, we should do a subscriber check. Where are we at? 99949. 51 subscribers from 100,000 subscribers. If you are watching the stream and you haven't subscribed, or if you have another Google account that you'd like to log into really quickly and subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate that. and maybe we can get to 100,000 subscribers today. That would be amazing. We'll be going for an hour and a half now, though, so I don't know how much longer I can go. Um, so maybe we'll stop just short, but it'd be nice to get there on stream. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. I would appreciate it. Also, this is a Q&A, so if you're just lurking in the stream and you're too scared to say anything, just say hi. And if you have any questions for me about my videos or about me or this channel or whatever you want, you can ask a question in the chat and I'll read it. I'll have it open. Napoleon says almost like 500 euros. Albert Fink says tuition is around 300 euros per semester in Germany, but that includes a free bus/train ticket. 300 euros a semester. That's crazy. That's so cheap. What? What am I doing? What am I doing in London? It's ridiculous. Bjorn says in Europe, universities and much else is free. It just that working costs 50% or more. Okay. Bjorn says, what do I think of applying behavioral science to large language models? ChatGPT can be spooky human. Yeah, I mean, I imagine OpenAI have consulted with psychologists and language experts to make it seem more approachable, I assume. Um, and but I think a lot of it is also like bottom up training, so that it'll just be going on like what do people respond best to, and then over lots of iterations and training, it learns how to speak in a more human way. So yeah, it can be spooky human, and I think ChatGPT is very useful for behavioral science, for coding, for research. So yeah, obviously you have to be careful that it's not telling you nonsense. But yeah, super useful. GNPAHDC says, Counselor, tell me about this painting. Patient, I don't know, but it's not my mother. She's the farthest thing from my mind. Lol, read voice papers, title negotiation. And you'll subscribe. Thank you. Matthew says, need psychology research ideas. Right, you're going to have to narrow it down a bit more for me. What are some potential areas that you're thinking of? Are you looking at habits? Are you looking at personality? You're looking at one-off behaviors. Are you looking at? I'm just thinking of behavioral science questions because that's what I'm specialized in. Are you looking at criminal psychology? I don't know. What are you looking at? Alison says any ethical issues with testing hypotheses on a small group of volunteers to reduce the risk of wasting research dollars on formal studies that won't bear fruit. We might have 100k volunteers here. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, it depends what you're testing, right? But obviously, even if you're testing it on a small group, it all has to be above board, and yeah, make sure that no one's getting hurt. So I think that is it's perfectly. It's a very good practice to do if it's all verified and ratified and checked out. Any more questions? I think I'll go for another 15 minutes. I doubt we'll get to 100k by then, unless you guys all log in right now and subscribe. But hopefully, maybe by the end of the day, we'll be there, or tomorrow. Yeah. Did you say negotiation? Hard to hear. Title is negation. Oh, maybe I read it wrong. Sorry. It's very short and eye-opening. Dare you to read it, Pete. First person subjective stuff is what he opened up IMO. Mansi is doing research on personality disorders or childhood experiences. Okay. Personality disorders. I don't have too much experience with developmental psychology, but how does childhood experience normally work? It's usually twin studies, right? You look at twins, or maybe you just do large enough groups where you can sort of control for various factors. Yeah, I don't know. You tell me. Because it's verified angry popper noises. Okay, I see lots of people jumping in and out. Um, so if you're in and you're just joining us, or you've just been watching for a while, maybe you haven't said anything yet in the chat, feel free to talk in the chat. Say hi, ask a question. This is a Q&A. I have chat open and I'll be reading it. So I need you to ask me questions. Otherwise, I got nothing to talk about. Adverse childhood experiences and the attachment literature on that topic. Yeah, attachment styles is really interesting aspect of psychology, like secure attachment versus unsecure attachment. Anxious or needy. Uh, yeah, maybe look into attachment styles, right, or relationship styles. That's very interesting. Um, very good. Shiro Shoto. I think behavioral science can definitely help in diminishing the negative impacts of workplace politics. It can. There's a really good book called, I cannot remember, but there's a very good book on this topic. Um, where she talks about workplace relationships. And what's interesting actually is there's a lot of parallels between workplace relationships and like personal relationships. Um, and there are some things that we do in the workplace with our workplace relationships that would actually benefit our personal relationships and vice versa as well. Like, for example, at work, before you fire somebody, you have to kind of give them a warning, build up a case, um, and then you fire them, right? If they continue to fail to perform, you fire them. And then in our personal relationships, we often don't do that. Like one thing will go wrong, and then we'll break up, and then that sometimes doesn't feel quite right. So like, maybe taking more of a workplace approach. I mean, obviously it's a bit it sounds silly to say, it feels a bit cold hearted to say, but like if you're like, well, you know, this person who I'm in a relationship with is not doing this thing that I want, and I'm gonna give them, 30 days. Like give them set a deadline, gonna give them 30 days to improve on this thing. And if they do, then we'll carry on. And if they don't, then we'll break up. All right. And like that kind of more kind of level-headed thinking is something that can apply to your personal life as well. Pang Ching Ho says, "Would you do a video on trading psychology? I mean, stock trading, also." Ooh, good idea. I have thought about it before. Um, but there's a lot to unpack, right? Like at a very basic level, there's things like loss aversion, where people are like, um, uh, where people are more averse to losses than gains. And then there's like the idea, but if you're an experienced trader, do you still feel that kind of effect? One of my colleagues actually did a PhD on this topic where they found that people who have experienced bigger losses so say you're somebody who in your time as a trader you've lost like say 20% on a trade, right? But then your colleague next to you, the biggest loss that they ever experienced was 5% on a trade. And then if the next day they both experience 10% loss on the same trade, how do they perceive that 10%? So it turns out that the person who has experienced the 20% loss in the past sees the 10% as being less significant than the person who only has experienced a 5% loss in the past. And that shows that like um, your relative traders judge the significance of a loss relative to their previous experience, um, and so which is obviously a kind of irrationality, right, or a kind of misjudgment of trading um, because at the end of the day, it's 10% either way, right? Like no matter what you've experienced in the past, it's still 10%. So you should be making the same evaluation whether you've experienced something different in the past or not. So yeah, so very interesting research from one of my colleagues. If human behavior can be indistinguishable, replicated by AI, that just brute force finds patterns and concatenations, digitized data about behavior, isn't that revolutionary for behavioral science? Yeah, and it's actually being used somewhat already. There's something called agent-based modeling, where you can create fake AI human or things that represent humans in a system, and then you can like change parameters and see how they react to those parameters, and then tweak things. And so that has been shown to be fairly some on a case, depending on what you're doing, but it can be fairly reminiscent of real human behavior. So yeah, it's a thing that people are already doing. Napoleon says, likely happened in the last 2 weeks to many traders. Yeah, absolutely. Alison says, can you break down the basic methods for setting people's mindsets in ICTs? What else besides getting them to read an article or write a paragraph? Yeah, how do you get people into a certain mindset? Um, Honestly, reading an article and writing a paragraph is probably one of the better ways to do it. Um, you could also test them before and after they do that to see if they respond differently to certain questions. Um, but to be honest, a lot of mindset research is pretty sketchy. Well, not sketchy, but like is not. I I'm very skeptical of anything to do with mindsets in general. As a behavioral scientist, I'm more interested in what people do rather than like how they think about things. Um, so yeah, uh, why not just look at their behavior, right? I found a paper that looks suspicious. The title fits the tadpole format, but it's not in my field of expertise. What else can I look at to test it? It doesn't have the Dead Star flow cytometry plot. Um, you what can you do to test it? I would see like yeah, if the title lines up, if some of the plots line up with other paper mill stuff, then you can report it, right? Report it to the journal, report it to you can you can tell Elizabeth Bick if you want, um, and they can look into it as well. Um, yeah, Napoleon says, I don't think they are indistinguishable. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not sure what that refers to. Old McDitfinger says, thing is that those black box algorithms generating stuff usually can't be mechanistically explained, i.e., it cannot be traced back how exactly they produce the output. Yep, that is true. But if you're talking about agent-based modeling, which I referred to earlier, agent-based modeling, um, you can explain what they do. So you give agents certain rules, and then you see how the system adapts according to the conditions that you give it. So like you you'd say like okay, um, person A, if they have three blue dots on them, then they spin around, and then you create like a bunch of person A's in your system, and then you introduce some blue dots, and then you see how who starts spinning, right? So that's kind of it's a very silly example, but that's like how agent-based modeling works. And so you can explain what they're doing because um, you program them to behave a certain way. Fromez, the original, says enjoyable videos. Keep it up. Thank you, Fromez. Appreciate that. Bjorn says stock traders are like firemen. They are untrained when they do their job. Bull and bear is a much better analogy than greed and fear because the big ones do it without emotions. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of markets actually, not just like stock traders, but like a lot of a a lot of behavioral biases disappear when people have experienced the market multiple times. Um, so um, yeah, so like when how do I explain this? So like it, if like for example like people who buy and sell a house, like most normal people don't buy and sell houses that much, right? But like if you're an estate agent and you buy and sell houses, or you're a housing developer and you buy and sell houses all the time, then like you're not going to be subject to the same biases that people are when they sell their own house that they've lived in for 25 years and they're selling for the first time. Like it's a different kind of experience. And so I do think that like experience in the market does seem to resolve a lot of behavioral biases. And so generally, as a general principle, behavioral science works best for markets where the people in that market don't have that much experience in what they're trading, right? Which is true for a lot of things that we do, like choosing a university or choosing a pension plan, right? These are things that we choose very few times in our life. Whereas things that are our job to trade in, then like, we're going to be a lot more rational about it in general. Connor McGailey says, hello. While in grad school 40 years ago, my friend, while completing her citations in her thesis paper, told me a mutual grad student had written his PhD thesis by plagiarizing a paper she had cited. His. Oh my goodness. So, uh, you know what? That is shocking, but not that shocking because I've had many people email me with very similar stories. And yeah, plagiarism is all too common, unfortunately. Um, and so yeah, you can report it on Papier, report it on report it to the journal. But yeah, there's no better. There needs to be a better way of reporting this kind of stuff, unfortunately. Paul XL says hello from Spain. Thank you, Paul. Hola. Thanks for watching. Um, Old McDutt Finger says, when you prepare a video about a fraudulent paper not from your core expertise area, how do you get into the topic quickly? I don't. I get into the topic slowly. There's so much. There's so much work that goes into these videos behind the scenes. Like you know, it is very difficult to produce the videos that I produce. They're very technical. They require a lot of research. And so I get into it slowly. I learn, I read, I research, I Google things, I ask ChatGPT to help me out. Um, and like, but before ChatGPT existed, I had to do it all manually. And I had to sometimes I would talk to experts to help me understand things, but most of the time it's just me Googling things and reading articles and trying to figure it out. And I don't always get it right. Like sometimes I say things that are wrong in my videos because, you know, I'm human and I make mistakes. But like, you know, I uh, I try my best. I try my best. Yeah. Ahmed says 1900, 100 away. Subscribe everybody. I'll give you an update. We are at 99952. 48 subscribers away. So yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. I probably will drop off in 2 minutes because I'm gonna lose my voice otherwise, talking this much. Um, but yeah, thank you guys for your help. Thank you for subscribing and for checking out and for chatting with me. I appreciate it. Um, Connor says, after watching your videos on plagiarism, I'm curious about the extent the guy plagiarized. I have both theses. Any ideas on a shortcut to figure out which paper was plagiarized? Well, which one came first? Which one came first? Honestly, I would just use ChatGPT these days and say, like, which of these, what areas of these two papers is the same, and then verify it yourself. And then, yeah, have a look. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but hi. In the latest Geno video, data was faked to agree the most expectable model of people being sociable after thinking of aspirations. Maybe original data had more potential to be well published. No, unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons why the publishing system is broken because the original data disagreed with their hypothesis, um, and we don't know. Well, actually, we do know, but yeah, yeah, that whole paper was a total mess, and I don't think it had more potential to be published. I think this was the result that they wanted. This was the result they thought would be most interesting for people to talk about, and so that's the one that they wanted, and that's the one that appears to be manufactured, according to the Harvard report. How many hours does it take for a video? It depends on the video. If it's one from outside of behavioral science, we're probably looking at like tw- at least 20 hours of my time. Uh, that's like research and writing and filming, and then uh, like 8 hours of my editor's time. I have an editor who edits a lot of my videos, Usama, who I mentioned earlier. So yeah, yeah, so we're looking at like 28 hours for a video, which is a lot when you think that a video is what, 15 minutes long ish, 50 to 20 minutes long. So yeah, it's a lot of work that goes into these videos. A lot. Uh, Ask Elizabeth Bick about that. Yeah, Elizabeth Bick is the best. Puffiscute says, for the Xerox hypothesis, the old school method for Western blot used physical X-ray film and required a scan to digitalize the image. Yeah, I know it. I know it used to, but these papers aren't that old, I don't think, and so I don't think they would have to do it that way. I assume, but like I said in that original video, I have no special knowledge of how Sudolph's lab specifically does their Western blots, so I don't know. Alison, what do you think about the morality focus of Geno? E.g., with the networking study, I think morality could have been left out of it entirely. Well, but that was the whole point of the study, right? It was like, um, does it make you feel dirty? So the whole point of it was to investigate morality, or moral discomfort, So if you take out the morality, what are you studying, right? I guess you could study how comfortable people are without making it like a moral thing, but it's kind of saying the same thing, just changing the wording. Giles McRiker, how easily experts became dogmatic and irrational in defending their positions. Sure. Um, Old McDuckface says, cool. Thanks for the answers. Appreciate your content. Got to go now. No worries. Git says, in behavioral terms, what might be some of the effects of creating an environment of the imminence and urgency of threat to do to a person in pressurized environment? Yeah, so good question. So we have a lot of research on this actually. So like when people are stressed, right? Because that's what if you're under threat or in urgency of threat, you're under stress. And what we know is that when your brain is under stress, when you have higher elevated cortisol levels, your ability to use your prefrontal cortex is actually inhibited, and that's the part of your brain that's involved in like careful planning and sort of what we consider as like more rational thought. And so when you're under stress or you're under, scientists like to call it cognitive load. So if you just have like a lot on your mind, then you tend to make decisions that are more in line with your habits, or your like instincts. And so you tend to act in a more automatic way. That's not necessarily a bad thing all the time. Like if the way that you automatically react is the correct thing, then that's a good decision. Um, so, for example, there was some work done on this about firefighters. So, like, how are firefighters able to perform their job under the stress of like a burning building, right? And the reason why they're able to do that is because they've practiced running into burning buildings and performing these things so many times in the past that it becomes automatic. So then, when they have to make decisions in that stressful environment, they are able to they just default to doing the right thing because that's what they've practiced, that's what they've trained to do. And um, so yeah, so sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. It depends on the context, as per usual. But yeah, the general idea is that when you're under stress, when you're under cognitive load, you do things that are more automatic, that are more like system one, uh, in Kahneman's two system terms. Levi Kin, do I work for the CCP? No, I don't. I was talking about your content to one of my professors, and there was speculation you are undermining Western education. That's ridiculous. He says, I personally love your content. Thank you. Yeah, I'm British. I have a British passport. I was born in Wales. I don't even speak Chinese. My parents aren't from China. No, I have no affiliation to the CCP. Absolutely ridiculous. Alison, in the abstract, they said their concern was frequency of networking. Um, right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, they could have done the study in a different way, but I don't think the way that they I don't think the method was that bad, to be honest, for the Geno study. Is obviously the problem. The problem came in the way that in the accusations that they have been changing the data after the study was done. Right. So that's where the problems lie. Um, I don't think the method was particularly problematic. Do I know about the King Saud University Journal stuff? I don't, but feel free to enlighten me. Jasper says, thanks for the chat. Sad to miss the 100K. I've got to head off. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Jasper. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the questions. Git says, I've been through an attack like this up to and skirting prosopagnosia, abulia, croeso, croeso. Okay, I'll give you an update on subscribers. We are at 99951. I am going to end the stream here. We didn't quite make it to 100K, but I think I'll be streaming for another 4 hours if I wanted to do it all on stream. So I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, everyone who asked a question. Thank you if you donated any money. You didn't have to do that, but some of you did anyway, and I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. So yeah, thank you all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody. Bye.